Hello everyone and welcome to another very nice game from the Croatian Grand Chess Tour being played in Zagreb. It's the final round and it's Magnus Carlsen versus Maxime Vachier Lagrave. It's still a race, anyone can take the tournament, well not anyone, either Magnus or Wesley will take the tournament. Magnus has to either draw the game against Maxime and then maybe Wesley will win against Levon and then we will have a playoff tomorrow. Or if Magnus is able to win his game against Maxime Vachier Lagrave, then Magnus, as he's the sole leader before the final round, will take the tournament. So without further ado, let's just check it out. Magnus opens with d4. Sorry about that. With knight to f6 by Maxime, c4, g6, knight to c3, and d5. We have the Grünfeld Defense, which is super exciting, as Maxime Vachier Lagrave, among his other specialties, is known as a world-class specialist in the Grünfeld Defense. I don't know. I always thought Peter Svidler was the biggest, most knowledgeable person about the Grünfeld, but everyone was talking about how Maxime is, so not really sure. But okay, Carlsen continues knight to f3 with bishop to g7, c captures on d5, knight captures on d5, e4, we have the main line, knight captures on c3, b captures, and now c5, so everything, perfectly normal for the Grünfeld, with bishop to e3 and now queen to a5, threatening queen captures on c3. We have queen to d2 by Magnus, guarding the c3 pawn. Also, maybe in some cases, bishop to h6 can be played, exchanging the dark square bishops. We have knight to c6, and now rook to b1. If the light square bishop is developed, you can capture on b7, and also you want to get the queenside rook away from a1 as soon as possible, as if the position opens up, you don't want it standing on a1 as a target for black's bishop. We have c captures on d4, c captures on d4, castles by Maxime, and now Magnus trades on a5. We have queen captures, knight captures, and now you do want to play d5 at some point, but if you play it too early, it's not good, because you want to keep this knight on a5. That's the biggest weakness in black's position. If you play d5, you take away the c6 square from black's knight, and it is a very nice idea. But here, while you can play this, Maxime already faced d5 in this position. He played it in 2016 and he won a very nice game. He continued e6, just attacked the center right away, and there were no bigger issues with his position. So here Magnus continues with bishop to d3. Magnus doesn't just push a pawn, and bishop to g4. Magnus castles in this position, and this position has been reached before. Rook f to d8 is a known move here. b6 is a known move here, just preventing this pawn from remaining a target. So maybe you can get the knight back into the game via b7, if not c6. But here Maxime goes bishop captures on f3, which can be described as extremely risky, because you're giving up the bishop pair very early on in the game. The game is on both sides of the board, and you still have a knight on a5, which could be an issue. So let's see what happens. G captures on f3 by Magnus, and now e6. Of course, Maxime doesn't want to allow d5. We have rook f to d1 by Magnus, and now rook f to d8. Of course, you want to control the d file. Bishop back to f1. Now the rook is also guarding the d4 pawn, as the black rook and black bishop were attacking it. And here Maxime goes b6. And here, what do you play? Of course, Maxime now wants to get his knight back into the game. He wants to try knight to b7, so Magnus prevents it. Bishop to a6. So a very nice maneuver. Bishop to f1 and back to a6. Here, you of course now cannot use the b7 square to get your knight back into the game. If you try knight c6, then bishop b7 just wins the game on the spot. So the knight is still remaining on the edge of the board. So let's see what happens. Rook to d6 by Maxime, and now rook b to c1 by Magnus. The c file is the only open file on the board, so of course you want to take advantage of that. But here is some, just for the fun of it, here is some super engine sorcery. The engines give king to g2 as a better move than rook bc1, because here, after king to g2, and if black continues rook a to d8, you can play d5 now. The point is, after e captures on d5, you can go bishop to g5, attack this rook, and now whatever you play, if you play bishop to f6, e5 just wins. You either win this rook or the bishop, or if the bishop captures, you win the rook on d8. Or if you don't block with the bishop, if you play f6, well, then you just get bishop to f4, the rook has to move, rook to c6, or if you go to d7, then bishop to b5 will just kick it away from the d file. Same idea. E captures on d5, and now with the passed d pawn, the bishop will simply be well, very successful in escorting the pawn up the board. So this is some super engine sorcery I just wanted to mention, because after rook b to c1, the same idea doesn't work. Maxime did go rook a to d8, but now you don't have the luxury of going d5, because after captures and bishop g5, you can actually block with bishop to f6. e5 doesn't win now, because after bishop captures on g5, your rook on c1 is under attack. That's why the engines give king to g2 as a better line than rook bc1, but like I said, it's some super engine sorcery. Bishop to g5 now by Magnus, trying to weaken the black's position even more, as if you move the rook, then you get bishop to b5, so the rook will eventually have to move from the d file. With f6, pushing the bishop back, bishop to e3, and now h6. And here we have a very interesting position. All of black's pawns, well, not all of them, but most of them are now on the 6th rank. And if I had this position in a blitz game, in a bullet game, in a hyper bullet game, I would I would immediately go rook to c7. And it's interesting that, I mean, what other move is there other than rook to c7? It seems like such a wonderful move. It's an open file, you want to get this rook all the way up there, attack the a7 pawn. But here Magnus took some 20 plus minutes to decide on his next move. And I was very surprised when the move was not rook to c7. Now, of course, Magnus is a world champion. He didn't like rook to c7 for some reason. The problem was with rook to c7, you get knight to c6, defending the a7 pawn, and then after white attacks it, for example d5, you get e captures on d5, rook captures on d5, rook captures and e captures on d5, but now you get knight to b4. The a2 pawn is under attack, the bishop on a6 is under attack, and also the d5 pawn is under attack. So you have to move the bishop, bishop c4, but now knight captures on d5, your bishop on e3 is under attack, and well, Magnus did not like where this was going. So here he did not go rook to c7, well, his position is better. He still has the bishop pair. Like I said, the game is on both sides of the board. You have to really take your time, and this is what you should always do when you have a better position. You should take your time. Like I said, he took over 20 minutes here, and he played bishop to b5. So now, if, for example, the same variation happens, knight to b4 at the end of that variation will not come with an attack on the bishop on a6, but also you are now already controlling the d7 square. So here Magnus also has some ideas of transferring the bishop over, for example, to b4, from where it will kick away the rooks away from the d file, which is what Magnus wants to do. So he can push d5, create a passed d pawn, and start really pushing for the win here. But here Maxime now also gets his say in this. He pushes f5. Now he forces Magnus to decide whether he wants to capture, and if he wants to push d5, he should do it now. So he does with d5, and now g5 by Maxime. With bishop to d2, now for the moment you still cannot capture here, so first he captures on e4, with f captures on e4, f captures on e4, and now a wonderful idea. It seems like you can win material here and get rid of Carlsen's pawns in the center of the board, but if you capture bishop to b4, will force the rook to move, and then again you will get your passed pawn here. So here Maxime finds a beautiful defensive resource, and that is a6, and it is just a wonderful idea, where if Carlsen captures on a6, for example bishop captures on a6, you get e captures on b5, and now bishop to b4 is not a problem, because, well, no longer is the light square bishop here, so you don't control c6 or d7, so you can go rook to c6, and now after e captures on d5, you can play rook captures on d5, and now again white does not have bishop to c4 to win the game, because the knight here also guards the c4 square. And even if at some point you were to capture the knight here, then after pawn captures, the bishop on a6 is under attack. So a6, just a beautiful defensive resource by Maxime. Bishop to a4 by Carlsen, of course he doesn't capture, and now e captures on d5 by Maxime. With bishop to b4, you have to make this Zwischenzug work, because, well, you first have to free your rook so you can recapture on d5. We have rook to e6, and now rook captures here, attacking the rook here. So what do you do here? Best for Maxime is just rook to b8, getting this rook out of the way, not capturing on d5, and then, for example, after bishop captures, pawn captures, and rook to c4, defending this pawn here, we get this opposite color bishop endgame, which is still very much playable. But here Maxime decided it was not a problem, that he can actually give Carlsen the passed d pawn. He played rook captures on d5, with e captures on d5, and now rook to e4, which comes with an attack against the two bishops here, and this is what Maxime had in mind. He thought, well, I'm not going to tell you what he thought, but feel free to pause the video here and try to find the absolute best move that Magnus played in this position. While I have a nice sip of my water. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. I'm sure you've been brushing up on your endgame skills and have found rook to c8 check. But this is what Maxime had in mind probably when he decided to give Magnus the passed d5 pawn. He thought that if a3 now, just defending the bishop, then rook to c4 is super strong. Of course, you don't want to trade. After rook to e1, you go knight b7. And now, after rook to e8 check, which is very nice, you're going to go king to h7. You still don't have bishop to c2 check because the rook is guarding the c2 square. So, bishop to b3, rook to c1 check, king to g2, and now bishop to f6 will just create additional squares for the black king. You don't allow the rook to go to e7 to try and pick up the knight here. The bishop and knight are guarding the d8 queening square, and Maxime fights on. But here Carlsen played rook to c8 check, and now you have problems. You don't have the option of going king h7 because bishop to c2 wins the game on the spot. So king to f7 was played here by Maxime, and now comes a3. But now it's really different, because now rook to c4, as we've shown in the previous line, is met with bishop to e8 check. And now after king to f6, because the dark square bishop does not allow the king here, the pawn doesn't allow here the king to enter the center of the board. So king to f6, but now rook to b8. You still don't trade, of course, and now the bishop, and the rook are controlling all the three squares that white needs to promote the pawn. d6, d7, and d8 is coming. So after a3, Maxime played bishop to e5 to grab hold of some very important squares. But now Carlsen goes bishop to e8, similar like in the previous line, king to g7 now, and now just d6. He starts pushing his pass pawn, which is what you want to do most of the times. Rook to d4, and now just d7. The threat, of course, is d8, as white already defends the d8 square. So knight to b7, now controlling the d8 square with the rook and with the knight. But Carlsen goes bishop to e7, brings another defender to the d8 square here. And now Maxime rook to e4, which shows how much of a fighting spirit he has. He still finds poison in the position, because here, if Carlsen just, brings a queen into the game, he doesn't really care. Then you get captures, and after captures here, you get bishop captures on h2. So Maxime would still grab a little bit material for the piece, and here you would have 4 pawns against 2 pawns, so 2 pawns for the piece. You still can't capture here, as the rook would be hanging. So even though white is winning here, you would really have to work for your meal. So Carlsen, not in a rush, he plays rook to c6. Now just gets the rook out of the way, threatens to win more material here and kick away this knight from defending the d8 square. And now again, Magnus doesn't care about bishop captures, because after rook captures on e7, you just play rook captures on b6, the knight is under attack. Knight to d8, rook to b8, and now there's no more play for black here. If you move the knight, knight e6, now you just queen the pawn, and after knight captures, the rook captures, but now it's 3 to 2 pawns, so only 1 pawn for the piece, completely winning for white. So here, bishop to d4, defending the b6 pawn, but now, as the bishop left the defense of the c7 square, now Magnus plays rook to c7, and it was in this position that Maxime Vachier Lagrave resigned the game, as now there is nowhere for the knight to go to. You can try something like rook captures on e7, but it's pretty pointless, as after rook captures here, there's no stopping here. The bishop is helpless to help out with the defense of the d8 square. Nothing to do there. So what you can do, bishop c5, but now after white gets a queen, you can capture here, but it's a queen and bishop against a rook and bishop. Of course, it's not even a little bit dangerous for white. So after rook to c7, of course, Maxime knows it's over, and really just a wonderful win against the Grünfeld Defense by world champion Magnus Carlsen. And this makes it, I don't know, probably Carlsen's 8th classical win in a row or something like that. And he's not up there yet to his former glory. He will not break his former rating record, which I believe is 28.89 or something like that. But, you know, he's getting very close to it, and it will be, well, it's just going to be very interesting to see how far he can go. And he finished this tournament with +5, which is insane, because this is probably the strongest tournament where he finished with such a good result. As he mentioned in the tournament, in the interview after the game, there were no outsiders here, only the absolute you know, top elite players of the world. So no guests, you know, with some 2,600, 2,550, 100 players. Which is, well, just all the more impressive. So as he came into the last round as the sole leader of the tournament, by him winning this game means that he also wins the tournament. So even if Wesley wins the game against Levan, he does not have the chance to catch up to Magnus. So the Croatian Grand Chess Tour is now over. I don't have all the results, but we are going to show at least one more game from the final round, and then we're going to show the complete standings, but probably tomorrow morning. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it, and really just you know, we can learn a lot from this. How Maxime allowed this pawn to be promoted into a pass d pawn, and then the bishop pair was used to such a, you know, to such a degree to escort the pawn up the board. It was just amazing. I always enjoy when you know, something like that happens. But yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Michael Bogart for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. If you haven't checked out the game between my nephew and Garry Kasparov, it will be the first link in the description you will see. So if you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's really an awesome game. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content, checking up on your suggestions. We are now going back to the Capablanca saga, and so on and so on. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday.